I got to tell you, I was, I don't know if skeptical was the right word, but I wasn't sure about the come in, see the office. And I remember driving home after getting a tour and being like, there was a reason that they did this. And, I called one of my buddies who was at a investment firm that led one of your rounds. And he was like, and I was explaining the feeling that I had when I walked into the office. And this was in air quotes, like a dead day.
It was a Friday. Actually. It was a Friday before President's Weekend. Yeah. So people were skiing.
And I remember just, I was relaying the feeling that I had, which was like this electricity. Like it was palpable. You could feel, it was like buzzing. And he was like, dude, that is exactly the feeling that we had when we walked into their office. And he was like, they insisted that we come to their office. So anyway, I wasn't sure. And now I get it.
Yep.
I imagine that most people that come into the office, I imagine it's very intentionally designed for that feeling that I had when I left the Verkada office.
Yeah, I mean, I think it very much is and has been designed that way, sort of from the beginning. I mean, I think in the early days of this company, you have less funding, so you just put everyone close together. But we learned to like the energy and the sort of hum and buzz that you get, and so we kept building it that way. And I think it's pretty good, and it's definitely an asset. When it comes to recruiting, when people come in, they feel the energy, they feel excited, and I think people leave thinking like, oh yeah, these guys are getting something done, which is good, right? That's exactly the kind of feeling you want to have when you visit an office.
I relayed this to you when we were talking last time, but we swung by the cafeteria. Yep. And again, this feeling that I had, it reminded me of the good old days of San Francisco in the Bay Area, when my girlfriend at the time worked at LinkedIn, and I would go visit her and they would have the cafeteria and everyone would be in the office. And you don't really realize the feeling that you miss until you feel this feeling again. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think, I think what I realize is it's like a second set of friends, right? Like you come into work and it energizes you to see the people that, hopefully you work with, you respect, you like hanging out with. And I think that's just part of life. I think it's really good if you can come to your professional life and you look forward to that, right? And some of that is, because you feel productive, you get something really good done. Maybe, you advanced the company's mission or whatever it is that you're doing. But a big aspect of it is, you just have to like the people you work with, and that gives you a lot of energy.
But was that proclaimed from the start?
I don't think it's quote unquote proclaimed from the start.
But you saw the value accrue over time of being in person with people.
For sure. I mean, I think, the way I would describe it is, when the company starts, by nature of it, as a founder, like no one wants to join you. You don't have money. You can't pay salaries. So, the initial set of people who work with you, are either friends or people you've, really convinced to join this crazy mission. And then they very quickly become your friends. So I think, in the very early days of the company, you sort of naturally have that, sort of feeling, that sort of energy. I think, the question becomes like, once you cross the 100, 200, 500 employee threshold, how do you maintain that? And I think, it's roughly around 200 employees where we started being quite intentional with a lot of, things we do in the office, to keep that energy high.
I was at a friend's house, over the weekend. They live in the Berkeley Hills, and both of them work remote. They have a little baby at home, and they were talking about how nice it is to be at home. And I kind of went on this diatribe of like, in general, we're losing a lot of communities in our life. Like more and more, we're like becoming less religious. I'm interviewing Sarah Fryer from Nextdoor tomorrow. We're becoming less neighborhoody. You usually don't know your neighbors. The like atomic family is not what it used to be. And so I think work took a lot of that identity for people, and that community that you would get in the workplace. I think we've, since COVID, lost a lot of that. And that sucks.
Yeah.
Like that totally sucks. And I think that the feeling that I get, and I'm actually not blowing smoke. I was very skeptical coming here the first time. The feeling that I get being in these offices is a feeling of community. And I think that people get very energized by that feeling. Like, I think that there's just something magnetic about this idea that you're doing something with people that have a shared goal or a shared vision. And that could be some religious doctrine, that could be something about your kids or your family, whatever it is. You agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think, look, like I said, I think you come to work and it's about the people, right? I mean, I think very few of us come to work and it's just about the task at hand. And I think, I don't think it's necessarily like you have to be at certain hours in the office or it's about being strict or anything like that. I think, the way we thought about this problem is, we felt that for thousands of years, people sort of like gathered together to accomplish tasks that they were passionate about together. And I think, being in person, it fuels that creativity. It fuels the casual conversations. I think some of that is all about how we have a shared idea about what it is we want to do and how that's going to, do something good, maybe change the world. But I think a big part of it is just, the different bases on which people get along, right? Like maybe you and I both like skiing. Great. We're going to, talk a bit about that. That's fantastic. That brings us closer. That makes us, more at ease, more comfortable, talking about different ideas, having conflicts, having productive arguments. I think that's all part of, sort of your day-to-day, working with others. And I don't think necessarily all of that is lost when you go remote. But I do think that, the kind of on-site environment is very, very good in creating that kind of comfort space for people to collaborate.
Totally. I'd say a majority of our top portfolio companies at Kleiner Perkins are in the office. And most of them are software businesses. And in your case, you're software and hardware. Like when I was at the Whoop office in Boston, they were all in the office. Like everybody was there. Of course, because you're working on like hardware components. Same thing that Elon talks about when he talks about like being Tesla. In the factory. Same thing, right? Like you have to be there. You can't do that remote. How much of the hardware component is a forcing function of just like, look, we have to be here?
I think it's not so much that's the forcing function. I think it was more, our decision to be here. And I think it was, really, it came from two sides. I mean, one, I think, during COVID, when, the world was shutting down and going remote, we were growing our employee base very, very quickly. We were like, roughly speaking, doubling every year, going from, I think we were just about 200 before COVID to, 400, 800. We're now just shy of 2,000 employees. I think, one thing we realized is when you're growing that quickly, onboarding all of these new employees, bringing them into the company, bringing them into the mission, bringing them into the culture, and doing all of that remotely is just tremendously difficult. And so, I think that was one of the key drivers, much more so than, hey, we need a hardware lab. Yes, we have, some hardware components, and yes, we need to do some of that. But I think, if we wanted to be remote, we could manage the kind of the hardware aspect of it. But I think it was much more about, the type of environment, the type of company that we wanted to be, that really led us to make the decision to, really bring people back as quickly as we could. And that started, frankly, for us in 2020. We quickly realized and started bringing people back. But then also, and I think this was a second and very important aspect, we were very conscious that we didn't want to accidentally build a distributed team. And so what I mean by that is, I think when COVID happened, a lot of people thought, hey, maybe it's okay. Maybe we'll have people all over the world. And I think for us, the question was like, well, wait a minute. 2 months ago, we wanted everyone in San Mateo. Why do we suddenly want to have people all over the world? Like why make that change now? And I think, we thought about that question and we said, no, actually we want to co-locate people. And we implemented a lot of tactics to just make sure that we don't accidentally end up in the spot where the workforce is distributed.
What does Verkada do? Can you give like the 30 seconds, or maybe like how does a customer use it?
Sure. I mean, we build a software platform for physical security, all things physical security in one single pane of glass. It started with video security. So think of cameras in a building like an airport or a hospital or another high-skill environment. We've since expanded to doing other parts of physical security in the building. So, people going through doors, air quality in the building, screening visitors who come into the building. So think of all aspects of physical security in a single modern cloud-based software platform is how I think of Verkada.
Raised at 3.2 billion last valuation, which was, by the way, in October of 2023. Yeah. So like that might be a real valuation. Like that actually, that might not be fake.
Yeah,
like
I think it was 3.5 in October this past October.
Yeah, exactly. 3.5. Yeah. So like that wasn't ZERP era. Like that was not that far. That was not that far long ago.
Yeah.
Yes. And even during COVID, again, I don't know, but because you're a physical, you're a company that tracks physical activity in and out of workplaces or schools or whatever.
Sure.
So you probably, tell me if I'm wrong, didn't get the like COVID bump that a bunch of these remote tooling companies or mental health companies, or you pick your company, right? Most software companies, you probably didn't get that crazy bump.
Yeah, I would say it was pretty, seamless. Like we didn't get a tailwind or a headwind from COVID.
Yeah.
I think we've seen with our customer base, a lot of shifts in the types of industries that, wanted to transact with us through that period. So as you might imagine, like, retail, slowed down a lot. To your point, offices, workspaces, there was a little bit of slowdown there. For sure, we've seen a lot of pickup and advancement in, kind of medical and that side of the world. But I think, a lot of what Verkada does is applicable to businesses that are going to keep running, right? And so, if you think of industrial customers, if you think of airports, if you think of transportation, like, they're going to need to secure their premises regardless. So it wasn't, from a business momentum perspective, I think where we felt COVID the most was on international expansion. And the reason for that was we planted our seeds abroad shortly before COVID hit. So in late 2019, and then all of a sudden, like you're told you can't get on a plane, you can't travel, you can't see your team, you can't see your customers. That was a big challenge. And I would say, I think if you looked at our business metrics, that would maybe the only metric that you could see and credibly attribute to like, okay, COVID had a meaningful impact there.
Do you think that maybe one of the reasons why I'm pulling so hard on this COVID thread is because I think that many entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley fancy themselves as original and first principle thinkers. And this is one example of an area where you actually went with your instinct that you thought was best for your company. And it's funny because some of the most unique businesses that I've ever studied are outside the Bay Area. Like they just do things so differently, whether that's 1Password or Zapier, and the way that they think about fundraising and how long they waited to do that. There's just so many examples of these companies that are outside the Bay Area. I wonder, like, do you ever worry about being in the thought bubble? Like, is that even a thing in your mind?
Yeah, I think, look, for sure I think when you live where we live, when you're here in the Bay Area, like, how everybody thinks about certain issues. Right? And so you can definitely get caught up in that. I think a lot of it is like just seeing how the rest of the world works. A lot of it is, to your point, using examples of, how other businesses run, right? How I even think, even if you zero in on the Bay Area, you can think of like how businesses are created today or maybe in the last decade, and then think back to, I don't know, how Cisco was born in the 90s, right? And it was a vastly different journey, right? Like what venture funding looked like was vastly, vastly different. How quickly you wanted to get to profitability was vastly different. So, I think for us, it's really just, we try to think of like what's right for the business and what's right for the long-term outcomes we want for the business. And then we work back from that, as opposed to saying, hey, this thing is a, kind of a trendy approach right now. Let's just follow that approach.
Yeah, but like, can we go into that more?
Sure.
Like, why do you think that is? Meaning, I think every founder knows that they have a unique company. that their company, if someone really deeply actually studied their story, not just the retrospective narrative that someone tells about their company, but actually understood it, every single one of them looks very different. And every decision that they make needs to be context dependent on the dependencies of the company, like the things that company needs at that time. And so I guess the thing that I don't understand is like, is it a fear of being misunderstood? Is it like why do so many founders ask me, hey, Joubin, what does Glean do about this? What does Rippling do about this? Like, why does that question happen? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. I mean, I think what ends up happening is, at least, this
like, why don't you just trust your gut?
Yeah, I mean, I think you often do, and you have to, or you have to learn to do it. But I think, for a lot of founders, myself certainly, included in this, so much of what you do for the first time, or you're seeing that scale for the first time, and then decisions, at the time you're making them, the decisions always feel big. So like one thing I've learned is like, if I look back in retrospect at things we've done, in retrospect, it's very easy to think about it, right? And if you think about the decision that you're taking in the moment, it feels very large, right? And oftentimes it's the first time you're dealing with this kind of thing. And so, I think some of that, kind of need for advice or need for someone else telling you how they've handled the situation just comes from, well, crap, this is a scary situation. Like, I need more brains helping me think of how to navigate it.
But I guess maybe that can lead you astray.
Sure.
That can lead you astray because oftentimes you're trying to do something very contrarian. And so getting the input of a bunch of people that are just pattern matching across a bunch of different companies can have an adverse effect, can't it?
Oh, for sure. And I think this is where, I think you choose your advisors wisely. And I kind of think of it as, at any point in your life cycle as a founder, you want to have, a few people that you look up to that, have been ahead of where you are today. And they're your true, core group that you go ask these questions. So I think of it less as, hey, like, let's gather data and like, what's the pattern? What did most people do? I try to think more of what did a company that had to navigate a similar situation do that resulted in a good outcome for that company. And if you find those examples, I think you often end up with, with advice, with tidbits of information that is not actually pattern matched, that ends up being, kind of quite original. And, I think it gives you a little bit more of the reinforcement. It actually gives you the courage to follow your gut or to follow those, those kinds of like first principled ways of thinking.
Who are some of the folks that are in that camp for you today? Like the next era of business leaders that you want Verkada to go aspire to try and be those types of companies?
Yeah, so one company that we love seeing their journey and we look at a lot of decisions they made along the way is Palo Alto Networks. So we love the business, and I think in 2012 when they went public, that business looked very similar to Verkada, right? It was a hardware, software systems company. There's fewer of those than kind of, maybe the pure SaaS plays these days. So that's one business that, we've seen execute phenomenally well. And certainly as we've talked to people who worked there and navigated decisions, we've gotten phenomenal advice from them. And so, I think that's an example. But you always want to have a list of companies like that you sort of see some parallels and you look up to it. And ultimately, you build respect for the people who run them. And that's where you get some advice.
Yeah. I mean, even Palo Alto, they got rid of their CEO twice. Couple of times. Could you imagine that? Like seriously, like now that you've built the kingdom of Verkada in San Mateo, like what would you do? Like, let's just imagine. Let's just can I just play make believe with you?
Go for it.
And there's a coup. And you're out. I don't think it's going to happen. I think you're a very firm leader of this company.
Sure.
But what would you would you go do another company, you think?
I think so. I think I probably would. I think it depends on the circumstances, really, right? I mean, I think, these things happen in kind of a variety of ways. And, I think, look, like there is a scenario where the job I do today becomes a job that, maybe is not the job that I love doing. Right. And in that scenario, I'm all for hiring someone who can, build the value faster. And as a,
You are?
Yeah, I think I would be.
Meaning, like, do you really admire Palo Alto Networks in all the ways that they've built that business?
I think it's astonishing how big they got that business, right?
Yeah,
if you look back to it in 2012, I think they were doing something like 100, 200 million in annual sales. Today they're a $100 billion company, and that takes transformations, right? And I think, there is a point at which, I think you have to be aware of like how much you are scaling. And if the scale of the business is outpacing you, you have to be open to that, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I would like to think that if that were happening at Verkada, I would be open to that. That's not the case right now. But I definitely think about it. And I think you have to think about it for yourself. I think, you think about it for everyone on the team, right? Because the business, I think if you're in the situation we're in, is growing so quickly that the likelihood that the business outgrows the capabilities of individuals that you haven't seen at any given point in time is frankly likely.
But interestingly, the only person that actually gets the benefit of the doubt or the people are the founders.
Sure.
They always have the longest...
The longest view on the company.
But also the longest rope. Meaning every executive is always up for getting topped.
Sure.
And that's a big part of your job is to evaluate how executives
the team is doing
are scaling.
Yep.
And I suppose the board's job
is to
evaluate. But do you think that's,
I think it's the board job. I think, to some degree I see it as my own job.
Do you?
Yeah, I think so. I think, look, if
is there something that's happened recently where you're like, oh man, I did not scale in the way that I should have on this thing?
I think I can certainly think of like in the journey of Verkada, I've had like, massive along the journey.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that, for most of them, I was able to recover and kind of correct and learn from those mistakes. But yeah, I think, look, like, I think for sure there is paths that you could see a company going where, the skill set that, a founder and seed like myself, has might not align with what the company needs.
Yeah.
And I think that's totally fine.
Yeah. It's, I think like it's such a cool and interesting job.
Yeah.
That why would you nobody wants to let go. Yeah. And I actually think that the companies like Palo Alto Networks that are that self-aware and selfless, to be so mission driven about the company that what they really want is to see that to completion, that they be willing to leave the throne.
Oh yeah.
That's a very special type of leader and company.
Yeah.
And I think that's an outlier type company.
Sure. I think, look, like we hope to build an outlier type of company for the long run. And look, I think if the point in time came where I think that was what I deemed or what we deemed as the right decision for the company, I would hope I would, be willing to take that decision.
When I walked in to your office, there's the pictures of everybody's face with that's sequenced by when they joined the company.
Yep.
How cool is it going to be when you inevitably take this thing public and so many of those people are like standing with you?
Oh yeah.
On the stock exchange? Like how special is that going to be?
Well, it's going to be awesome. I think it's going to be a great moment for everyone. I think, a lot of people look forward to that. I also, very much think of that, kind of as a milestone, not an end goal. And I think that's important, right? And I do a lot to remind, I think, everyone at the company of that, right? The IPO is just another way of raising money, and it is a moment of, kind of providing liquidity to a broad range of folks. But I do think that, where we are as a business and the size of the markets we play in gives us a lot of runway for many, many, many years, kind of post a public offering if that were to, kind of take place.
I noticed that you sit on the engineering floor.
Yep.
You're an engineer by heart.
Sure.
Like even as we were getting ready for this, you're like literally tinkering with the video camera.
Yeah, I like cameras.
That's
so
your
I want to make sure the setup is good.
That's your thing. That's always like you would do that for fun.
Yeah.
You do that for fun.
I do it for fun.
Do you like being the CEO? Meaning those types of jobs, or I should say the types of responsibilities that you would do for fun, that give you energy, are very much engineering centric. Now, this is, again, pretty consistent in Silicon Valley. I don't know. How do you like the job more, less, or as much? Because today there's very little tinkering that you're actually doing. You're managing people.
Correct.
You know, you're fundraising, you're setting and defining the vision, and you're hiring. There's like the big, there's probably
big
the big
three, of the job.
big three buckets of the job. Those are all very like extroverted tasks, people oriented, just not like, building a camera. I don't know. Like, are you surprised by how much you enjoy this part of it? Or do you feel like you've had to grow to like it? Like, what's your relationship to the actual responsibility of the day to day?
I think I
honestly.
Yeah, honestly, I love my job. I love what I do. I'm like, I wake up happy every morning, and like I like literally can't wait to come to work, which sounds like totally cliche, but it's totally true. I think I'm very conscious of the types of things I like doing and the types of things I don't like doing as much. And I try to structure, my team, my world, my life, so that I get to do enough of the things that I love doing. One of which is building stuff, right? And I think, even in my role today, I spend a good amount of time with engineers, with engineering leaders, with our, kind of production and design teams. And that keeps me close to the product. It also keeps me close to the customer. So that, that aspect of it is for sure there. And I think to your point, that's part of who I am. I love it. Like, I think even if I had to only do that at night, I'm going to do that for eternity. That's just ingrained in me. But, I think the way I would describe my job and maybe what I really like about, kind of being in my position, which, I consider it a kind of a great, crazy privilege to be able to do any of this and to build. It's crazy.
It's amazing.
It blows my mind, right? Like I sit here and I'm like, 8 years ago or 7 years ago, there was nothing, and there was my living room and there was 4 guys. And now, 2,000 employees and 20,000 customers. So, I think, first I just really appreciate to even have this, the privilege of doing this. But what I like about it is, if you think about it, within any organization, like within a company, people run across different challenges, and hopefully they solve many of the challenges. And when they can't solve it, they bring the challenge to their manager, and then it just keeps trickling up. And so, sometimes the way I describe my job is the hardest problems just kind of like naturally bubble up to me. And there's a wide range of problems, and that's actually really, really cool because, I think I couldn't tell you that there is ever 2 weeks that are the same for me, right? Or even maybe 2 days that are the same for me. It's like my life changes, and the types of things I work on are, often pretty difficult. Often, kind of many people thought about them, and it, sort of like trickles up to me. And I think that's like an awesome spot to be, because if you embrace it, not all of these problems are fun, but if you embrace it, man, you can learn so much about such a variety of topics. And, I think I still have enough flexibility to be able to say, with a good team that we've built, to be able to say, hey, these are, I don't know, of the 10 problems that bubbled up to me this week, these 3 are in a category that I really like. So I'm going to dig deep on these. And these other 4, maybe some of my executive team or someone else can go handle. So I think, that flexibility and that ability to work on really, kind of hard things is definitely very exciting.
Do you do anything intentional about regulating where your time is spent?
Yeah.
Like, do you do any look backs on the week and prioritize the big problems? Like, how do you think about where your time is spent, and how do you prioritize the things that you want to make sure you continue to carve out that give you energy?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, short answer is yes. I think you have to be very conscious of how you spend your time. Otherwise, I think you end up getting pulled into things that are urgent, but not necessarily important. So I like to, think of what's important, and that's often much longer term than the kind of urgent things. But to give you a sense of tactics, like I hate large meetings. Right. I literally have, when I look at my calendar, I try not to have any meetings with more than 5 individuals. If it's a meeting that's larger than that, it better be an all hands or a presentation or something like that. But generally, I think people work better in smaller groups. So that's that's maybe one hack. I try to isolate blocks of time in my calendar. So, every day, I think it's very easy when you're in my position to just get your day, literally blocked back to back in, 20, 30, 40 minute chunks, whatever. Almost every day I try to have, an hour or two of flexible time in the afternoon where I can, roam, I can talk to random people, I can, check in on a project, I can just jump into something. And I find that very, kind of very, very valuable. It's just an informal way of gathering information from the company.
Almost every day you block off an hour.
Almost every day. I try to make sure my day is never like a grid from, kind of beginning to end. Other things like my evenings are precious to me. So, I would generally describe myself as an evening person. And so, my day doesn't start as early as many CEOs. Like I
don't know. A lot of tech founders and they usually start a little later than they say they do.
Yeah.
They're usually like 9, 10 a.m.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the camp I'm in. And I'm
like Aaron Levie says he putters around in the morning.
Yeah.
He's
I'm very much in that camp, right? Like my brain, I think is, the boot sequence is long, and then when it's fully booted, it's like very powerful and it stays online for a long time. So that's kind of who I am. But where I was going with it is, then my, sort of my evenings after I get home and, kind of my kids go to bed, that is like my focus time. And, that's very, very valuable because, you don't have distractions and, any kind of task that you want to, really dive into. Okay. You get the 2-3 hours of like uninterrupted flow.
After the kids go to bed.
Think of like 9:30, until, probably typically it's midnight or 1 a.m.
That's your flow state.
That's my flow state. And I love it. And sometimes I let that go until, 4 or 5 a.m. But
are you serious?
Yeah. I mean, if I get into something, I love it, right? That's like from back being an engineer.
And if you go till 4 or 5, you have no problem. You're not like, oh, I have meetings in the morning. You'll just cancel the meetings if you go till 4 or 5.
It depends, right? I think I try to make sure I get, a decent amount of sleep. I think that's important. But yeah,
what was the last rabbit hole that you went down till 4 or 5 in the morning?
Oh, I think, it happens like on weekends, it happens quite often.
Seriously?
Like, oh yeah, because it'll be a Friday and people
will go to sleep. And it's a business problem?
Well, it'll be work. It'll be something
work related.
Product related, work related, and you think about it. And I'll give you a crazy example, right? Cameras are sealed containers, right? So you seal the camera when you put it outdoors, and you have this problem with like fogging. Like if water gets into your camera, it'll fog internally, and so we're solving this problem in 15 different ways. But yeah, one of these evenings I got really into reading about, water vapor transmissivity of materials, right? So like how much water vapor can you push through literally aluminum or, rubber? And, you just like read more and, you find experiments and things. And, ultimately it's super fun because you come back, to the office the next day or next week and you have a really good chat with the team and, it's just fun.
Why do you hate huge meetings?
I think people are more direct and open and less afraid of sharing how they actually think in a smaller group. And I think it's almost like, probably some psychological or evolutionary thing. But I just find, in a small group, it doesn't matter if I'm in the meeting or if I'm not in the meeting. You just get much more thoughtful participation from the 3, 4, 5 people. I think you get into the 12, 15 person meeting and, you get a little bit of someone says something because they feel like they need to participate or someone doesn't say something because, it's too many people in the room and they don't know how it'll be received. So, I just find that small group is, just fundamentally much more collaborative.
Do you especially worry about that now that you're like, the CEO of this huge company? Like, obviously you don't view yourself that way, but everybody else does.
Yeah.
That's got to also weigh on you.
Yeah. I think it's something that you have to be, conscious about. And I think in my case, I had to actually work on it. I remember very clearly, the company was, maybe 200 people at the time. And up to that point, I knew everyone. I knew everyone by name. I think I'm everyone's friend. And I think, a new employee joined around that time. And on their first day, I woke up and I started asking them about their project and the details of that. Of course, later that evening, I get an angry call from that person's manager. It's like, Philip, what are you doing scaring this person on their first day? I'm like, dude, I was just trying to be helpful and understand what the projects were. But you do have to, I think, I acknowledge, like, at some point you have to appreciate that, okay, people do think about the dynamics and the hierarchy, but if you're conscious of that, I think I definitely try to have an interface that's very approachable. Like, I want my employees to talk to me. I want them to be unafraid to, debate things with me, disagree with me. Frankly, I think, like, healthy arguing is very, very good, right? Like, if everyone has the same opinion, chances are you're not building the best possible product or you're not making the best possible decision. If you have opposing opinions, it's somewhere between them that, somewhere in that arguing that you find the cracks in the foundation of what you're saying, and then you can fill those cracks, you can fix it, and, and you ship or build something really good.
Do you think you were, like, when I look at your background, like Stanford, started a company while at Stanford, right? Sold it to Chegg,
yep.
KP company,
yep.
Like, should have been on our radar, like, should have been on a bunch of radars.
Yep.
But you spent 4 years at Chegg, right? Kind of running
almost 5. Yeah,
almost 5.
Yeah.
You were not an unknown quantity at that point. Like, if you ask any VC, what they're looking for is, like, kind of this. Okay.
you tell me. Yeah.
So started a company. Yep. Like, it was not their home run, but it was like enough. It was something. Yeah. It was something. Yep. They want to get back in the game. Yep. Stanford, like, super smart engineer, all these things, right? Do you feel like you were underestimated or misunderstood after that? Meaning, when you were going out to raise funding for, I don't know, the seed or the A, were people clamoring?
Yes and no. So the yes part of it, I think because of what I've done before, it was easy to get meetings. So it was very easy to get in front of.
You were walking up and down Sand Hill.
Yeah, you could get, everyone on Sand Hill would be excited and would want to take the meeting. I think where it was tricky was the industry we chose, which initially was, squarely video security. And squarely, from the beginning, we said we would need to make the hardware, we would need to make the camera. It was an industry that, I think it was a mix of, like, it's little known. It's not down the, kind of common path of what, in 2016, I think, what a lot of VCs were thinking about. And I think second to that, there was sort of a graveyard of startups or companies who, had tried to do some sort of, video analytics for security type of startup in the prior decade. And so I think those two things made, people really reluctant on the market, right? So, like, in the beginning of the company, I would say raising money, especially relative to what the climate was like in 2016, was quite difficult for us.
How long did it take before you, like, when you were explaining the idea in the early days and you'd say, like, we're building a video camera company?
Yeah.
And, like, in your gut, it didn't feel great to say that, like, it wasn't the sexy thing to say, especially at that time.
Yeah.
How long before you started to believe that, like, no, screw everybody else. Like, I am building a video camera company. People don't understand what that actually means. I see the future that I'm going to pull forward. But, like, how long did you, before it took for you to be like, okay, I don't have that feeling inside?
I would describe it almost as, kind of a little bit of a wave, right? So I think we definitely started there, right? We started on the high, like, we were very convinced that we were onto something, that we found a market. We had talked to enough customers. We, kind of played with the technology enough and with competitors' products. Like, we knew we had something special at the very beginning. We were very excited. So we started there. I think we went out to, kind of talk to folks and raise our first, seed round and A round. And that was crushing. That was like, the bottom of the wave. And I think for months, like, literally we were like, is this thing going to work? Is this a good idea? Like maybe we're just completely crazy. Maybe we're not seeing something. But, gladly, I think we had already invested enough. We were already far along the journey that, we said sort of no matter how this plays out, we're going to try to see it through at least to the first, kind of product launch and market reception. And then, I think the reception of the market once we launched was extremely positive, right? So that pulled us back up. And I think, it's probably like 2018, so maybe call it 18 months into the journey. We started seeing enough customer traction and enough, meaningful deals or meaningful size deals early on in the company's life cycle that we said, we were onto something and this thing actually will likely work.
And from the get-go, did you hone in on this idea? Was this the idea when you got the gang together to start working on a company? Was it to start working on Verkada, the camera company?
Not at all. Yeah. So I, this is early 2016. We started getting back together and
what were you doing at that time before?
So I had left my prior job and I got a green card, which unlocked my ability to basically be unemployed and think of my next startup. Right. Yeah. So I convinced one of my co-founders, James, to leave his job. He was actually working at a law firm at that time. He's a computer scientist who ended up being a lawyer. He hated law. I was convinced him to get back into engineering. And it was initially two of us, and we gave ourselves, we told ourselves we'd take all of 2016 to sort of look at different ideas, talk very openly to many people, kind of brainstorm, build things every day. And we did build a lot of stuff. And if we landed on something that we liked, we would go, build a company around it. And if we didn't, we would go back to the industry, sort of 12 months later. That was the plan. About 5-6 months into the journey, is where, sort of the larger group, the four of us got together around this idea of video security. And that, quickly solidified as an idea that we liked.
And how old were you when, in 2016, how old were you?
29.
29. Yeah. Were you married?
No, not yet.
Not yet. Had you met your now wife?
I have met her years prior at Stanford, but yes,
you hadn't rekindled it yet.
We had not rekindled it yet. No.
And so maybe what I'm trying to get at is what's the calculus in your head?
Yeah.
Like you were, a VP of product management or whatever, right? Yep. Like you had a great job.
Sure.
You were probably getting looks at other great jobs. At the time in 2016, there was a lot of interesting companies being born or in the early days or really having traction.
Yeah.
And I imagine there was some gravity pulling you towards those two. Like what was the trade-off?
Yeah, I think, look, I like building stuff. And I think at that point in my life, I knew in particular that I enjoyed the risk. I enjoyed the 0 to 1. And I think I was also keenly aware that, as sort of life goes on, life gets more complex and, cost of living and your ability to do these things doesn't necessarily increase. Right. And so I think, for me, it was a good moment in time where I think with my prior experience and kind of selling the company to Chag that I did, I had the ability and the flexibility and a fairly uncomplex life, right? Fairly uncomplex personal life.
Yeah, like single guy living in the Bay Area.
Single guy, like low.
Have a nest egg from the acquisition.
Exactly. Had some savings from that. And so,
but it didn't change your life. It wasn't
like I'm not going to work forever. Definitely not. But I think it definitely gave me the ability to say, hey, I will take a year off work and I won't have income. And during that year, I can, brainstorm and, hopefully land on an idea. And frankly, I think that period was fantastic. Right. And I think you have to have, a certain level of like self-discipline and drive. And I think, I probably work my hardest or one of my hardest in that year. Like, we'd wake up early, we'd build things, we'd build prototypes. We didn't know if it would work or not. But yeah, I mean, that's ultimately what culminated in kind of the idea around Verkada. And I think, for anyone thinking to start, I always tell folks like not jumping into the very first idea, but giving yourself some time, even if it's just a few months to, really explore things, talk to other people about it and zero in on the thing that makes most sense. I mean, at least for us in this case, proved like extremely valuable.
Brian Long from Attentive, the Attentive founder, did the exact same thing. He actually wrote a book about it now called Problem Hunting, where he had started a company prior to Attentive that they were getting like a $700K PO from a Fortune 100 company. But in his heart of hearts, he was like, this isn't a big enough company that I want to build. And I think, his point was like, why are there so many like infrastructure monitoring tools? Because it's like all these developers are being told, go spin out of your company, the problem that you see, go solve it. And then now we have like 100 of the same solution. Were you convinced that you wanted to be the CEO? Like I'm curious because again, you're like a tinkerer at heart. Did you have a strong desire to be the CEO? I wouldn't say I had a strong desire. By the way, it's okay to say yes. Yeah, no, I would say it. I think there's many aspects of my job that I naturally enjoy. And I think, in the group of folks that I worked with, like it just made sense at the time. So, but I think I was always the presenter. I was always the guy who would go and like, pitch the idea to someone else. I was always convincing people to like, gather around it and join it. Right. So yeah, I think there was there are properties of me that are, I think the very introverted engineer who loves the craftsmanship and the, like really obsessing about a particular aspect of a solution. And then I think I'm very aware of the fact that there's an extroverted side of me and I have a strong need for people and I really enjoy it. Right. And then that's like another part of my drive. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination that just like worked well for me. And you came into our office at the seed or A and I think so. Yeah. And we decided that, like everyone else. We made a really expensive decision, didn't we? We made a really expensive decision. Like, you have this thing that the team tells me about of like the first 10 people in the team really matter. And I imagine that philosophy was not just the teams that you build from scratch now, but also the first 10 to 20 people in the cementing of the company. Oh yeah. Did you have that fervent of a belief about? Yeah, I think it's both. Like, what is the belief? Well, I think the belief, and I think this is both, my belief. I think it's Hans's belief. My co-founder had, kind of similar experience with this, but I think our belief is that the first few people who you hire for any given team or for the company that matter set the tone for the rest of that team. And I think, we firmly believe if you get those first hires right, their ability to attract more great people will be exceptional. I think conversely, if you screw up the first few people on the team, that team is likely set up for failure. And then making a change or correction later on is very expensive, right? So if you pay attention to it at the beginning, I think the thesis is, spend all of your time on the first 5 or 10 hires of any given team. If you get that right, things are likely or have a good chance of progressing well. Kind of conversely, if you don't get it right, the cost later will be tremendous because you have to make a big change. And, at that point, the team might be 30, 40, 50 people and recreating that from scratch is very difficult. When you raised $15 million Series A, right? Yeah. When you raised that money, did you know what to do? Like you raise all this money and we do a lot of Series A's and then, it's almost like VCs just assume that founders are like, oh yeah, like this is how we're going to spend. These are already perfect capital allocators. When it's like, going back to our point of like when you're like in a room of darkness and you're kind of like feeling around and now you have this like bank and you got to figure out like, how do I use this? One of the challenges that I've noticed is that founders are still very used to them doing all the things. And so part of it is unbundling this muscle memory. For sure. Tell me if you think I'm wrong. But like when you get your first Series A check, to go delegate responsibilities. And that delegation happens through capital allocation. Do you agree with that? Like, was that a transition that was tough for you? Like, how did you? 100%. I think, if you're, at least in my case, kind of as a founder, at the beginning, you obsess over everything, right? Like everything has to be right.
And what's the way to do everything right? Do it yourself, right? Well, that's the most wrong statement I could make, right? But that's definitely how you think at the very beginning. And so, I think when the company's tiny, you're doing everything from QuickBooks and finances to, being a product leader, being a salesperson. And I think, probably the wisest and best allocation of money, early on, was hiring people who've been ahead of the scale that we needed, right? So
but not too far ahead.
Not too far ahead. You want people who can get their hands dirty and do the work. And that's the tricky balance. But you want people who, kind of are experienced and can bring that on and, can move the needle forward. And I remember that, pick any aspect of the business. I think to this day, I always try to think, where can we hire someone who's, the kind of expert who can, take us through that next phase?
Were you asking people how do I sequence my executive hires? Sure. Did you sit in a room with your co-founders?
You just look at what's breaking and
what's the breaking, but everything's breaking.
Everything's breaking. And where are you the bottleneck?
Right.
And maybe what do you not like doing? Right.
Yeah.
So, I think, I'm thinking back to the early days.
How did you sequence the executive hiring?
Yeah, I think it was.
Or did you hire ICs?
Yeah, some of them we promoted from within. So we've hired people that we felt were high potential, and then they took on, more and more responsibility. Some of it was, I'll give you a very trivial example, right? The company started, I own finance. I think I was the CFO that you have to nominate in the, Delaware C Corp or whatever. At some point, I'm definitely not doing that. One of my co-founders did that. At some point you hire an accounting firm and then you're like, wait a minute, we have enough stuff here that we need someone to run finance, right? And so then you hire your head of finance or head of accounting or something like that. So, I think there was some of that. There were some areas where, it was more clear, right? So I think, if you take marketing or sales, for example, right? In both of those aspects, we knew that, we needed someone who would be in seat, who would be driving, promotional programs and outreach to customers and demand generation. And so that was a role that, we opened the search on sort of as soon or maybe even a couple of months before we had the product launched in market. Wow. So, some of them I would guess, you
had some foresight on.
Yeah, we had some foresight on or, some ideas on, right? And then you just execute and kind of play it out.
It's funny because now today, you're pulling those examples of you're the CFO, then you get the co-founder to do it, yep. Then you get the accountant to do it,
yep.
An external firm, then you get a CFO or yep. a VP of finance.
Yep.
When I was doing the tour with you,
yep.
You've taken this all the way to the extreme, which is you'll hire a interior designer full time because you don't want to
yeah.
externalize that.
Yeah.
A welder
yeah.
is on staff
yes.
full time.
Yeah.
What other, there was all these roles that you would never think
yep.
would be internal to a tech company.
Yep.
So it's funny just thinking through the progression that you've gone through. You're taking this all the way to the logical extreme,
yeah.
but it's based on the values that are important. And so it strikes me that probably what your thought process was, hey, it is very important that people are in the office. Yep. I want to create a space, going back to our earlier conversation, that people like being in the office. How am I going to do that? And then you probably went through and did the exact same thing where you're hiring interior designers from the exterior, hiring welders. Is that fair?
Well, I think it's it sort of follows a natural evolution, right? It's you started with exactly what you said, which is we want to be in office. We want to have fantastic space. I think you also try to balance that against the reality of commercial real estate is really expensive. And, hey, we're an 8-year-old company. We're not, crazy flush with cash. We haven't found an oil well in the ground, right? So you want to balance sort of a very good result with a very reasonable approach. And I think that's what led to some of these, these kinds of outcomes that you're mentioning where, we found that we do just enough projects within our space here and spaces mm-hmm. around the world that, some of these roles it makes more sense to have on staff rather than hiring outside firms that, obviously charge more for that.
Yeah. Where does that do you have other ideas of interesting roles that most people wouldn't think of? that you think you should bring in-house?
Well, I mean, I think going back to your, your kind of earlier statement of the good old days at LinkedIn or Google, Facebook, whatever, many years ago. I mean, post-COVID, with the city being shut down, we had hairdressers on staff. We obviously built a commercial kitchen and served meals when, many restaurants weren't open back yet because of staff shortages, right? So, definitely we built, a lot of that like life facility support into the building. I mean, during COVID itself, we had nurses on staff that would do PCR same day tests, for any employee who wanted it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
it's incredible.
I think it follows necessity. And then I think the way we think about it is, you evaluate, sort of the benefit that it brings versus, the kind of cost, and often it's worth it.
I think it's incredible. Isn't it one of the biggest kitchens in the city? Like
I think in San Mateo, we're the biggest commercial kitchen.
And so going back to like the commentary around zigging when everyone else is zagging, like the narrative today is around austerity measures, right? Like cutting, layoffs, getting rid of the perks, all remote because it's cheaper, it's more flexible. The list goes on and on. And it seems like you're doing the exact opposite.
I think you're
growing. You grew almost 50% last year.
Yes, yeah.
You're going to grow almost 40% this year.
Yes. So the company is definitely growing, and it's, I think I would describe it's definitely good times for us. Like the market's there, the product's selling. And so, I think that drives a lot of that momentum. I would still say we're a small player in a giant market, and we're seeing a lot of pull and a lot of demand, which, to some degree you could say that enables and funds that activity. But the other thing I would tell you is that, I think we're thoughtful and concentrated on how and where we spend money, right? So, I'll give you an example. We do events for our employees. We often have the debate of, how many events and how grand and how much should we spend, per head on a sales kickoff or a engineering offsite or something like that. And I think in recent years, I think our bias has been, we want to give folks the energy and we want to give them amazing experiences. And so we concentrate the spend, right? Rather than doing, quarterly, big kickoff events, we'll do 3 kickoffs that are like, called more cash efficient, and 1 big kickoff at the beginning of the year, for sales, right? And that cost us, more for that one event, but I think it's also like appreciated more by the employees than if you just took the same amount of money and like evenly spread it. And, instead of 1 epic event, you had sort of like, call it 4 more average events, right? So I think we applied that kind of logic to, kind of the many elements of, of perks and things that we do in the company.
You mentioned there's a bunch of things that you screwed up along the way. Like going back to my question of like, where did you not scale?
Yeah.
Like what were areas where you, didn't scale? And you're like, look, I screwed up a bunch of things.
Oh yeah.
What are some of the ones that still hurt?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think, look, the one that's very obvious from the early days was when the company was growing and we're call it about 200 people. There's 2 things that I screwed up big time at that point. One, I was unaware that, at that point, the next employee who joins doesn't know who I am, right? And so, today I invest a lot in kind of like different forums and questions and all hands and different things so that employees know who I am, how I think, what my framework for decision making is. I didn't do that at the time. So, all of a sudden, probably if you're employee 250, I'm just a random asshole running the company. That's all you know about me, right? So that was kind of one category of screw up. I think, where it culminated, and it was, kind of a pretty big on my part, right? We had a incident with some of our sales guys who engaged in bad behavior, right? And we should have like sent a very clear message to the team and, kind of parted ways with those folks. We didn't do that. And the mistake was, twofold. We waited, we fired them later for their misbehavior. But I think combined with the first point I made, it sent this like wave of ambiguity to the team about who I am. And it just clouded everyone's like, is Filip the right guy? Is this the right company? How do I feel about the team? How do I feel about being here? And I think that was kind of a, in retrospect, a very obvious, a very massive screw up, which could have been like very, very easily remedied. Obviously, we tried to do what's right for, kind of everyone involved, but, ultimately it's very clear that in retrospect, that was not the right decision.
Yeah.
But then what was tremendous, and this is, kind of my key learning, is that it was, one bad decision that then lived with us for kind of months after, right? And then I had to do so much work, to sort of undo that bad decision, right? And so that, that was kind of a very, very critical learning in terms of like, how you manage, how you communicate with the team. And it was definitely, kind of going back to your question, a point in time where the scale of the business and the rate of the growth of the business definitely on this particular question outpaced my rate of learning or my ability to consult the right people. And yeah, it caused, kind of quite a bit of trouble for some time, which, obviously we've worked very hard to, to kind of recover since then.
And like, when that happens,
yep.
And like, what does that feeling feel like? Like when you go home?
Oh, it feels like shit. I think very much like I wanted to do the right thing. I talked to my team, the team, like we all wanted to do the right thing. I think ultimately we made, the wrong decision. I don't think anyone intentionally made the wrong decision, right? But it was objectively the wrong decision, right? And so you have this weight because, all of a sudden, like you feel like the entire world, everyone, your team, your friends, like investors at the time that I was talking to, everyone begins to judge you and talk to you through the lens of that decision, right? I mean, I think it really, illuminated to me, how important the clarity of, kind of communication internally and like the clarity of handling these kind of situations is important. I mean, I think, the way you learn is you make mistakes and you correct them. That's what I fundamentally think. And so I can be only as good as the rate at which I fix my mistakes when they happen and how I learn from them.
So you're experiencing the hardest, hairiest problems that the company has.
Yeah.
The good news is easy for you to, for it to get to you.
Yep.
But then on the other hand, like most of our conversation is about like how well the business is doing, like the valuation and the people on the cap table and all these people that are coming to this nice fancy office. Like, isn't that kind of the two worlds that you're always balancing, which is like, you have this HR issue, but the company is like just raised a massive round, like you have this hardware issue, but the company is like, one of the darlings of the valley right now. Like, isn't that constantly the tension?
It is.
That you kind of like,
it's always this balance. I mean, my favorite tool in this bucket is I call it customer therapy, which is whenever things go sideways, I just talk to my customers, and they have great things to say, and that just brings you right back up.
Interesting. So you'll just go jump on a customer call.
Yeah, if you just jump on with I think 20,000 or so customers now, like most of them have extremely good and extremely happy things to say about the product, and to me, that's a very clarifying North Star, right? Like, okay, things can go sideways, a fundraise might not be as good or whatever thing is happening internally. But at the end of the day, when you talk to those customers and they express, sort of like a very pure gratitude for how you've improved their, business or their life, or you've, made people, safer or more efficient. That definitely balances it all out.
Are you, you grew the company 40 to 50% last year. Now your base is what, 2,000-ish employees?
Yeah, just shy of 2,000.
Worldwide?
Yep.
Like across how many offices?
I think we have 17 offices worldwide.
17.
Yep.
You're going to grow another 600. Like what's the head count-ish? 600?
600 plus.
600 plus?
Yep.
Are you like, is that not just daunting? Like, are you not just like, holy hell, like how are we going to go find and compete for 600 of the best people in the world that opt into the Verkada culture that, like, isn't that's like gotta be absolute top of mind for you.
Yeah. I think if you think about it as a single number on a spreadsheet, it is scary, and you have exactly the thought that you have, which is how the hell am I going to find 600 great people? I think the secret there is kind of what you were talking about earlier, which is delegation and divide and conquer, right? So, okay, you take 600 people, we're hiring them across 17 different offices. And then within each office, you've got directors, managers, and, you get it down to like, okay, I have so many managers and they each have a headcount goal of +8. That's a very tractable number, right? And so, you kind of break it down and it makes it much more palatable. I also think, kind of the geographic dispersion of the office and the ability to tap into the different labor markets has been extremely helpful, helpful in hiring. And the last bit, which I think was a surprise and wasn't something we expected, but has been magical for us, is when you open these remote offices, people running the remote office feel like it's like their own. It's like all of a sudden you don't feel like you're, just a cog in the giant machine. You have like your own presence and you can make it your own. And
you're like the co-founders.
You're like the co-founder of Salt Lake, or you're the co-founder of Austin, or whichever city. And so what we've seen is like, a huge increase in kind of like momentum on execution and energy, especially as it relates to hiring, because, it's like this fresh start for people. And so that's been, kind of a very good part of this journey of opening offices around the world.
You have a pretty heavy, of the 2,000 people, almost half are in go-to-market. Is that right?
Just about 1,000 in the sales org, yeah.
And then of the 1,000 that are in R&D, let's just say, or not
the rest of the company.
Yeah, the rest of the company, 20% are hardware?
So on the R&D side, it's about, I would say 80-85% of the engineering is software engineering. And then it's a pretty lean, but great hardware team.
That also surprises me.
Yep.
Like, I don't know, I think of Verkada as a hardware company. Now, you might say you're a software-enabled company that does hardware. Sure, we call it whatever we want. But like, you put physical goods in the world. And they got to work. Yeah. There's to be like high uptime, Yeah. Like, that's surprising to me. That distribution is not what I would have thought it to be.
Yep. Well, I think the way you answer that is, if you think about where the hard parts of the invention are, I think that all is sort of on the software side. I think if you think of the hardware that we make, I think of it as almost a delivery vehicle for the software or for the end-to-end experience that the customer seeks, right? So, if you think about, I don't know, take our camera or our access control system or another piece of the equation, I don't think we're creating necessarily cutting edge hardware the way that, Apple has to do when they build the Vision Pro, right? There's a lot of like crazy complex things that are, that they need to essentially invent on the hardware side to make something like a Vision Pro or an Apple Watch work. I think, for us, it's a lot about being smart about what it is that we build, like how we choose the components, who we build it with. But ultimately, we're not building the image sensor. We're not building the lens. We're choosing vendors that make these different pieces. We design the package of how it all functions together, and we're very thoughtful about that. And then we do have, sort of a manufacturing operation with JDMs that kind of allows us to scalably build these widgets.
Yeah. You have a Vision Pro there behind your desk.
Yes.
And I guess I wonder, like, when you see, so you've played with it?
Yes.
As a tinkerer.
It's awesome. I love it.
You must love it.
Yeah, of course.
Are you tired of it yet?
I think I've played with a lot of VR headsets.
Have you?
Yeah. So I've played with the early Oculus headsets and all the Meta stuff, and a couple. I think the company's called Varjo.
Yeah.
That makes like an enterprise grade one. I love it just because I think ultimately I'm a nerd. I love technology. I love toys. I love gadgets. Look, I don't know yet what the super awesome ultimate use case for these things is. One of my co-founders got very into flight simulation. And so he's got a rig set up with a very high-end VR headset, and it's fantastic. I mean, you sit in the chair and you feel like you're flying a plane, and you keep doing it for hours.
Yeah.
So that's a use case that definitely resonated with me. I don't know yet what kind of the killer use case on the Vision Pro is, but I will tell you, like, I did bring it on the plane. I was the crazy guy on the plane, everyone's looking at me like, what is this guy doing? I'm like, I'm just watching a movie.
Were you watching a movie?
Yeah. And I could see them.
How much better was that experience?
It's interesting. I think from the visual fidelity side of things and from the audio visual fidelity, I think it was far greater than my default, which is bringing an iPad on the plane. I think the isolation was both fantastic and weird, right? So it was fantastic in that, you get into it and you're watching a movie and I turned on, I think they call it like cinema or theater mode. So it cancels everyone out, like everything out around you. And then you're sitting in your chair, you're watching a movie, and then the flight attendant bumps you. And you're like, oh, what happened, right? And so that, that was a little like disconcerting because it really puts you in the zone. But it was a good experience. I mean, I think, the technology needs to get smaller and easier to bring places, and the price point is, probably not accessible, for a lot of people at this point, but it is exciting.
Do you, going back to one of the points of like the pressure of the valley.
Yeah.
Like the pressure of the valley right now is that there's these platform shifts happening. Okay. And this is the thing. This is the new thing. And that includes the VR headsets from Apple. That's like captured the zeitgeist of everybody over the last few weeks. And that includes AI. Like those are the things.
Yep.
And like, look, do I think you probably have a good story for both of those things? I think you do.
Yep.
I think you do.
Yep.
I think that there's a pretty good AI story with what you all are doing and the information, the data that you're capturing and how you can empower customers. I believe that.
Yep.
But do you feel like there's just this undue pressure to now all of a sudden like go talk to your CMO about how Verkada is like an AI company?
Yeah.
Or when you're wearing these glasses, figuring out like, okay, Philip, what is your story about like, how we're going to integrate into this new platform, this Apple platform? I don't know. How do you think about it?
I mean, I think, certainly there is a lot of that in the Valley. I think you're right. Like a lot of people, think that way. I think my approach or our approach is, I love the exposure to the new technologies, and I think we try them and we see, kind of how they make sense. But I think for me, it's much more, about what's the long-term value that these things can meaningfully create within the context of, of our company and our, product and customer base, right? So I think I'm probably not the type of person who just, grabs the keyword because it's the hot keyword and attaches it to my company name and yells it from the top of the mountain. And I'm sure that costs me a little bit on the valuation side. But I think on the other hand, I think we are pretty thoughtful and, kind of bullish on some of these technological advancements and how they will, kind of over the next years or maybe decades, change the industry. And, certainly with AI and all the advancement there, I think, already the first wave of that, which was like the, kind of computer vision and autonomous vehicles wave, that definitely was a great tailwind for Verkada. And we've benefited from it greatly, and we've built a lot of that into our products. And I think what you're seeing now, as kind of this new wave of AI, I think there's going to be profound effects in terms of like, scene understanding and data analysis and all of that stuff that, you'll see in our products in years to come.
Yeah. Dude, I appreciate you doing this. Yeah. I really do. You also, as your team told me, they decided the final blow for coming to work for you and Verkada was meeting your wife, your wife, right?
Partner, yeah.
Partner,
yeah,
your
yeah,
partner.
Yeah.
And well, I guess that just checks the box for me of another great CEO founder who's been on this show who has a strong partner.
Sure.
So I don't know what it is. I will let you maybe come back to me with any other thoughts over time that you have of why the hell I continue to see this, but maybe story for another time.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
I appreciate you doing this. Are you hiring?
Always.
Are there any key roles that you want to shout out? Like, are there any offices?
Yeah.
Like you have 600 plus jobs to fill. So
yeah, I mean, look, we're hiring across all fronts, all offices. Most of our global offices are sales offices. So that's how you can think of, roles outside of San Mateo. In San Mateo, we're hiring sales, but also engineering, kind of G&A, all other roles for the business. So yeah, growing across all fronts.
And your sales offices, like when we walk the sales floor, there again, it gave me that like old school feel of like, there's like dashboards.
Yep.
There's like, it's happening.
Yes.
It's buzzing. Like someone closes a deal, like the bells go off. Like it's the whole thing.
Yep.
It's really cool, man.
Well, and I think, it's great because it's a great environment, frankly, for people to learn, right? So, that energy, it keeps you going. It keeps you wanting to do more. And I think when you create that environment, you just osmotically learn a lot from the people who are sitting next to you. And so that I would say is one of the, kind of best aspects of that particular job within our organization.
Yeah. When you hear the word grit, what do you think of?
I think of like the need to persevere, like the need to like, when you're building something, for me, it's always this question of like, how long do you try and keep trying? And at what point are you, kind of crazy and, in the middle of the ocean and you should give up? But, I think there is a big part of the journey up front, which is really tough. And I think, I'm not sure how many people, kind of appreciate that. But I think that's what you have to navigate. It's the choppy waters at the beginning. And then, even now when the company's bigger, I actually say this to employees at every onboarding we do. I think, the company and the markets and everything, it's cyclical, right? There's good times and there's bad times. And I guarantee for everyone who joins, if they're going to be here for a few years, for sure there will be a moment where, things won't be going as well as they had hoped, right? And that might be on their end, that might be the company end, that might be the markets, who knows? And so I always think of like this cycle of like, when things are going well, you charge up energy and you think of those things that make you exciting, like, like those positive customer stories or the stuff you love building or whatever it is that you love doing. And you store that energy so that, when invariably something goes sideways, you have it to dispense and you have a strong team and you can navigate through the storm, and hopefully get back to the clear on the other side.
I think that's well said. Can I ask you one more question?
Yeah, far away.
Did you see the Zuckerberg response did you see him to the Apple VR headsets? Did you see him like put on the Quest?
Yep.
Have someone like just like this, but like in his house.
Yes.
Have them put on their Facebook, the Meta headset.
Yep.
And he just does a basically product review of Apple.
Yep.
What did you think of that?
I've seen clips of it. I haven't seen the full. Watch it. I will watch the full length thing. I haven't watched the full length thing.
There's two things that struck me. Number one, talk about this ability to persist.
Yep.
This guy is still going and is like waging war against Apple in hardware. He's not even a hardware guy.
Yep.
And, he had to lay off like 20% of the company. Yep. He went through some really tough times over the last couple of years. Yep. They're not necessarily the good guy in the public sphere, and he just keeps going. So I think maybe that was like observation number one. Observation number two is there was something really refreshing, even though he's oddly robotic, there's something really refreshing about just him sitting there.
Yep.
Just like giving a breakdown as a CEO of like
how he thinks about
it. Here's why I think we win. Here's why I think they lose. Yep. Just like such an earnest dialogue with people about their product. And I think sometimes maybe kind of to be clear, the second observation is I feel like sometimes we over complexify like what we're doing, which is like sometimes maybe it's a podcast where a CEO just sits there and talks and gives a feeling about their vision that's visceral to people. So anyway, those are my two kind of like takeaways. I didn't know if you had a reaction to it or not.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think I'm amazed. I mean, I think what both Facebook and Apple are doing on this front is crazy. And yeah, I mean, I think everything you said is spot on, right? Which is, how do you go, like if you told me to go build a phone to compete with iPhone, I would tell you you're crazy. Like it's extreme challenge, right? So I admire them for, kind of both pushing the fronts of that. I mean, I think, ultimately what I think about it is I think, there is a certain level of hardware execution that enables these devices to be what I think, maybe, Mark and, Tim or Apple and Facebook are, respectively envisioning. I'm guessing they've seen a few versions into the future of what's possible and what these things can enable. And I would guess that is what is, kind of driving their, conviction on this front.
Do you think people underestimate this? Like, meaning, how hard it is to build whatever this is, V1 for Apple. Yeah. But as you put those on, I imagine the engineer in you.
Oh, I put it on and I looked at it for 10 seconds. I took it off. I was like, this is amazing.
That's what you thought.
I mean, I literally took it off for a second just to reflect on how clear and amazing the progress was. Right? I mean, if you've used, some of these things just 5 years ago, it would have lag and give you a headache and you'd see pixels, right? And, you put this thing on and it's super clear and, it reads your hands in space in front of you and it's super responsive. So yeah, I think as an engineer, I'm both blown away by how good it is. And then I'm excited about how, if I press the fast forward button in my head, I'm guessing, over the next 5-7 years, whatever it is, the next few versions, it just becomes better, clearer, more compact, more integrated. And that is exciting.
John Doerr says that the signature of a great entrepreneur is their ability to articulate a vision of the future that they can uniquely bend forward into the current. And when I was watching Mark do this thing, I was like, and he was talking about the Ray-Ban sunglasses and how the phone and the headset are going to work together. Right. I was like, this guy is literally looking into the future now. Yes. And it was very convincing.
Yeah. And I would bet they if you're them, you probably have mock-ups and betas and crazy gear, and you probably literally have seen the future, which I think is the only way to be as excited and as convinced as they both seemingly are about it. Yeah. But by extension, I'm excited. I love technology, and I love when people do something new because it gives everyone momentum to keep pushing.
Well, look, I can't wait to see what you pull forward from the future. I'm excited for everything that you all are doing. And I want to just come here and have a beer with you at some point to your office.
For sure, anytime.
Yeah. So I thank you for having me, and I appreciate you doing this.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah.